Okay, chapter 7 and 8 of George's Marvellous Medicine. Grandma gets the medicine, do you remember? Grandma sat hunched in her chair by the window. The wicked little eyes followed George closely as he crossed the room towards her. "You're late," she said. "I don't think I am, Grandma." "Don't interrupt me in the middle of my sentence," she said. "But you finished your sentence, Grandma." "Now there you go again," she cried, "always interrupting and arguing. You really are a tiresome little boy." "What's the time?" "It's 11 o'clock exactly, Grandma." "You're lying as usual. Stop talking so much and give me my medicine. Shake the bottle first, then pour it in the spoon and make sure I get a whole spoonful." "Ah, don't you worry, I will." "Are you going to gulp it all down in one go?" George asked her, "or will you sip it?" "Well, that's none of your business," the old woman said. "Fill the spoon." As George removed the cork and began very slowly to pour the thick brown stuff onto the spoon, he couldn't help thinking back upon all the mad and marvellous things that had gone into making this crazy stuff. The shaving soap, the hair remover. Do you want to turn and tell your neighbour what you remember? See if you can remember maybe 5 things or more. Go. 3, 2, 1. Washing powder, flea powder, shoe polish, pepper, wasabi, horseradish, and all the rest. Of course, all those animal powders and pills as well. And of course, most importantly, the brown paint. "Open your mouth wide, Grandma." "I'll pop it in for you." The old lady opened her small wrinkled mouth, showing disgusting pale brown teeth. "Here we go," George cried out. "Swallow it down." And he pushed the spoon well into her mouth and tipped the mixture back down her throat, and he stepped back to watch the results. It was worth watching. Grandma yelled, "Ow!" and her whole body shot up, whoosh, into the air. It was exactly as though someone had pushed an electric wire through the underneath of her chair and has switched on the current. She popped up like a jack-in-a-box, and she didn't come down. She stayed there, suspended in midair, about 2 feet up, sitting in a sitting position, but rigid, frozen, quivering. Her eyes were bulging, hair standing straight up on end. "Is there something wrong, Grandma?" George said innocently. Suspended up in there in space, she was beyond speaking. She couldn't speak. The shock that George's marvellous medicine mixture had given her must have been tremendous. You'd have thought she'd swallowed a red-hot poker the way she took off from the chair. Then down she came, plop, back into her seat. "Call the fire brigade," she shouted suddenly. "My stomach's on fire." "Oh, it's just the medicine, Grandma. It's good strong stuff." "Fire! Fire in the basement! Get a bucket! Man the hoses! Do something quick!" "Call it, Grandma," George said. But he got a big shock when he saw smoke coming out of her mouth and out of her nostrils. Clouds of black smoke were coming out of her nose, blowing around the room. "Oh, by golly," he said, "you really are on fire." "Of course I'm on fire," she yelled. "I'll be burned to a crisp or fried to a frizzle. I'll be boiled like a beetroot." George ran into the kitchen and came back with a jug of water. "Open your mouth, Grandma," he cried, and he could hardly see her for the smoke. It was so full of smoke, but he managed to pour half a jugful down her throat. A sizzling sound, the kind you get when you put water in a hot frying pan, came from deep down in Grandma's stomach. The old lady bucked and shied and snorted. She gasped and gurgled. Oh, I like that. He didn't just say it went out. She bucked and shied and snorted and gasped and gurgled. Spouts of water came shooting out of her, and the smoke cleared away. "Fire's out," George announced proudly. "You'll be right now, Grandma." "All right," she yelled. "Who's all right? There's Jackie jumpers in my tummy. There's squigglers in my belly. There's bangers in my bottom." She began bouncing up and down in the chair. Quite obviously, she was not very comfortable. "You'll find it's doing a lot of good, that medicine, Grandma," George said. "Good? Doing me good? It's killing me." Then she began to bulge. She was swelling. She was puffing up all over. Someone was plumping her up. That's how it looked. Was she going to explode? Her face was turning from purple to green. Can you see it? But wait! She had a puncture somewhere. George could hear a hissing sound escaping like a tire when it goes flat. She stopped swelling. She was going down. She was slowly getting thinner and thinner, shrieking back and back slowly off her shrivelly old self. "How's things, Grandma?" George said. No answer. Then a funny thing happened. Grandma's body gave a sudden sharp twist, a sudden sharp jerk, and she flipped herself clear out of her chair and landed neatly on her 2 feet on the carpet. "That's terrific, Grandma," George said. "You haven't stood up like that in years. Look at you. You're standing up all on your own. You're not even using a stick." Grandma didn't hear him. The frozen, pop-eyed look was back on her again now. She was miles away in another world. When you're in another world, you're dreaming of something. Or marvellous medicine, George told himself. He found it fascinating to stand there watching what it was doing to the old lady. What next, he wondered. Suddenly, she began to grow. Oh dear. It was quite slow at first, very gradual, inching up and up and up, taller and taller every few seconds. At the beginning, George didn't really notice her getting taller and taller. But when she had passed 5'6" mark, maybe a little my height, and was going on up towards being 6 foot tall, George gave a jump and shouted, "Grandma, you're growing? You're going up? Hang on, Grandma, you better stop now. You're hitting the ceiling." But Grandma didn't stop. It was truly fantastic sight. The ancient, scrawny old woman, ancient means old, scrawny, like skinny, and getting taller and taller, longer and longer, thinner and thinner, as though she was a piece of elastic being pulled up and stretched. When the top of her head actually touched the ceiling, George thought she was bound to stop, but she didn't. There was sort of a scrunching noise, and bits of plaster and cement came raining down. "Hadn't you better stop now, Grandma?" George said. "Daddy's just had this whole room repainted." But there was no stopping her now. Soon her head and shoulders had completely disappeared through the ceiling, and she was still going. George dashed upstairs to his bedroom, and there she was, coming through the roof like a mushroom. "This is my room." "Oh, whoopee!" she shouted, finding her voice. "Hallelujah, here I come." Oh, she's gone a bit crazy. "Steady on, Grandma," George said. "This is my room. Look at the mess you're making. Terrific medicine. Give me more." She's dotty as a donut, George thought. "Come on, boy, give me some more. Dish it out. I'm slowing down." George was still clutching the medicine bottle in one hand and the spoon in the other. Oh, well, he thought, why not? And he poured out a second dose and popped it in her mouth. "Whee!" she screamed, and up she went. Her feet were still on the floor downstairs in the living room, but her head was moving quickly towards the ceiling of the bedroom. "I'm on my way now, boy," she called down to George. "Just watch me go." "There's an attic above you," George said. "I'd keep out of there. It's full of bugs." Crash! The old grandma's head went through the ceiling as though it was butter. Ooh, I like that. He didn't just say it went through the ceiling, as though it was butter. You know, if butter's melting. George stood in his bedroom and gazed at the shambles. There was a big hole in the floor and another in the ceiling. and sticking up like a post between the two was the middle part of Grandma. Her legs were in the room below, and her head was in the attic above. Uh-oh, I think George might be in trouble. "I'm still going," came an old screechy voice from above. "Give me another dose, my boy, and let's go through the roof." Oh, she's loving it. "No, Grandma, no," George called back. "You're busting up the house." "Oh, I don't care about the house," she shouted. "I want some fresh air. I haven't been out of the house for 20 years. By golly, she is going through the roof, George told himself. He ran downstairs. He rushed out the back door and into the yard. It would be simply awful, he thought, if she bashed up the roof as well. His father would be furious. And he, George, would get the blame. He had made the medicine. He had given it too much. "Don't come through the roof, Grandma," he prayed. "Please don't." That's the end of that chapter. I think I'll stop there. I wonder what's going to happen when Mum and Dad get home. I wonder if Grandma is ever going to end up back at the same size again. I wonder how George feels. Perhaps you could talk about it with your friends.